Welcome back to 20 Minutes of Clarity.
And today we're diving into a topic that's critical for everyone's family, teaching your kids about wealth and money. With me today is Andy, the man merchant. Thank you, Andy, for always joining us so we could get into this topic. I'm looking forward to this conversation with you.
We just got through Valentine's Day. Hopefully everybody, had a great time, sharing the love of wealth and money from the topics. But I think this one's even more fun for this new session and this as we keep wrapping through the topic. So
that's right. And in this whole segment, this whole series is around love, and now we're talking about loving on our children and teaching them over basic financial concepts depending on where they are in their stage of life. Now, it could be they're starting out counting their pennies, or they're preparing to leave the nest. Understanding money is a lifelong skill that starts at home. That's where the majority of people actually learn about finances. So let's be honest, money conversations can feel awkward, and many of us didn't grow up with a clear guide on how to navigate them ourselves. That's why in today's episode, we're breaking it down into 3 key stages, right? So that we understand our listeners are coming from us at different stages of their life and their children at different stages. So the 3 core topics today is teaching kids about their money and why they're in their childhood. The second one is going to be guiding young adults within financial independence. And we're going to wrap up this conversation with preparing adults for that wealth transfer and legacy building conversation, which is all equally important. So we'll go ahead and kick it off around the teaching kids about money and childhood. Why is this an important focal point, Andy, to have within our kids when they're younger?
I mean, for me and for what I hope our listeners get, it's just getting the foundation right. You never build a house with a later phase or not a good foundation. And so what better way when children and kids are a sponge for information and finding a fun way to talk to them about money so they can relate, make better informed decisions as they grow. And you can do it in a lot of different fun activities that's not as serious. I think this is probably the most important time to start having that conversation with kids, is with your kids around money is at this time in their life.
Yeah, so my daughter's 10 and my son is 7. And, when my daughter was younger, she would, when asked, like, what does your daddy do? She would say he's a financial survivor. I love that. You have to be somewhat of a survivor to be an advisor in this industry, right? Surviving the market crashes. Like what she said was very profound for me. But it's also going into, like, she's used to kind of hearing me talk about finances. I mean, okay, so when I'm working from home, she could hear some of what I'm saying, but not a lot of it. I mean, she's running around, she's playing, she's having fun. But in the background, she's hearing me having those conversations. She sees Rachel and I every Saturday morning, like, looking over finances. So, like, even when we're not talking directly with her, she's still getting exposed to finances. So it's not like this ugly monster in the corner that we just never talk about, this elephant in the room. So reflect on that. Are you having open conversations or not? And because that could start forming those early on memories of finances and money. But like a tactical thing, Andy, that I was sharing with you, and it was funny because I'll bring everybody inside the inside joke. Andy sent me over some like talking points before we jumped on today. I didn't get a chance to read them. I jumped out of a meeting. I came right into recording our conversation. And it talked about in there about buckets of money and things that you could do with your children that are younger. And so I'm going to get into that story here in a little bit, but it was funny. Andy was like, okay, did you get a chance to read this or not? And I exposed myself that I did not get a chance to read it beforehand.
It's such a good activity, though. So I think it just proves how great of an activity. We thought about it ahead of time. And you're reading to me like, this is what I do. I'm like, did you time lapse? So for those that are listening and viewing this today, if you have children, young kids, probably under the age of 13, such a simple way to have fun and start with money. So Jason, share what you shared and what you wrote and what you do with your kids.
my daughter came up to me a few weeks ago and she goes, I got this money. It's about $84.73 to be exact. I got this money and I want to buy stocks with it. I want to invest it. And I was like, okay, tell me what you know about buying stocks. She goes, you buy a stock and it goes up and you make more money. I go, okay, we got to talk more about that. But like, you gotta tell your money where to go. Like, how much money do you want to save? How much money do you want to spend and enjoy life with? And how much do you want to like give or share, right? What does that look like? And she goes, well, that's a good question. Let me think more about it. And I was like, why don't you think about it? And then let's talk in a week from now. Now, over that course of the week, I went online and I bought on Amazon this piggy bank that has 3 different like slots, and they're titled share, spend, or save. Now I've always thought the share was give. It's all in the same. And then it came like with this little like registry book. And within the registry, you could put the percentage of what you want to put in those 3 different buckets. So now, fast forward, I'm having this conversation with my daughter in her room. She has her money laid out. It's all set up, right? And I go, how much do you want to share? She goes, 50%. I said, okay. All right, you're very generous. I love that. That's great. And then she goes, well, but wait, is that high? And I'm like, well, it could be a little high because you couldn't spend that or you couldn't save it if it's being shared. And then she says something that touched my heart. She goes, what does the Bible say? And I'm like, well, generally it says about 10%. That's what it says. She was like, okay, 10%. I'm like, all right, that's $8.74, right? Like, let's go into that, right? Okay. So we started to break down those percentages. She wanted to save 40% and then spend 50%. So then when I took those percentages and I turned it into numbers, it really hit her. Like, she understood it more. She was like, okay, so of this money, I got about 40 something dollars I could spend on whatever I want, right, Dad? And I'm like, that's correct. She goes, what am I going to do with the money that I saved? I'm like, we're going to continue saving it. And once it gets to a certain point, then we can start buying stocks. We could talk about buying a stock. And when the money gets to a certain point and you want to start sharing it, maybe you don't want to share $8. Maybe you want to have it grow to a larger amount. So then you could share a larger amount with a charity or a nonprofit of your choice. Then she's super excited about it, Andy, but my son walks in, right? The 7-year-old son walks in, and he's seen what we're doing, and he's engaged into the process. He's seen me write down the numbers into the registry book. And he goes, Daddy, can I have that for my birthday? Like, he wants the same thing at 7. Okay, he has my old wallet, Andy, and he loves this thing. He keeps everything in there. He puts it into a secure spot in his room. He's very savvy. Where our daughter was more of the spender. If the money came in, that money was out. So the fact that she had like $84 and change, I was already happy with, right? Like, she had something. So, okay, as I continue the story a little bit longer, Andy, that for you and the listeners, she comes up to me the day after and she goes, okay, now I need to do some chores to make extra money. I'm like, write me a contract. Let me know what chores you're willing to do and what amount you want for that chore. To wash the windows, Andy, by the way, was $3 a window. To sweep the floor and to mop the floor was $9. Yeah, so basically we could hire a full-time maid at these price points that she gave us. My wife was like, absolutely not. She's out of her mind. I'm like, no. Like, listen, like, she's starting off. We're going to teach her how to negotiate and understand her worth. So I purposely lowballed her on everything, right? And like, okay, listeners now are going like, you used to a 10-year-old? Yes, absolutely. You got to start them young, right? So I lowballed her on purposely on all these things. And she was like, can I have a day to think about it? I love that she did that. She comes to me in between that day and she was like, are you willing to move some of these things around? And I was like, yes, but if you go too high, we might end negotiations, and it just may be part of what you do. She was like, can I get your help on maybe making this a fair contract? So we did that, got my wife involved. Okay, so now we came to an agreement. Already, she's already asking us, what is the cadence that we need to do? How often can I dust every day? Like, can I sweep every day? Like, what's the cadence that you want us to do? So I love that she's learning like negotiation, but she's now going to be able to see that value of the dollar that she earns, that she's going to take 50% of that to spend. And then the rest is going to go to other areas. What I'm interested in seeing, and I'll give updates if we get back into this topic in a future podcast, do those percentages change as life progresses? Like, does that change, 3 or 6 months from now? Does she lower her savings rate so that she could spend more? My question to the audience, my question to you, okay, Andy, right on this topic, is like, what simple financial activity can you introduce to your child today to help them understand the value of money? As we get into the next topic, Andy, I'm going to have you talk more about this because of the ages of your boys. How do you guide like young adults into financial independence? The young adulthood to transition in this space really begins at this stage, right, of where your boys are at their age. And it's critical for budgeting, credit management, and basics of like long-term financial planning to help them really prepare for managing money in their own lives and even future responsibilities as life continues to evolve and grow.
Yeah. Well, and much like you, in our household, we talk, we're very open about the financial conversation. My boys know what I do for a living. They still can't define what I do for a living. It's very hard to define some of these roles, but they do know that, we do help people make decisions with money, and why not start with them? And so, just starting with a podcast, I think that's a big part of it. I used to go to take my youngest at the time to school, and he would listen to podcasts about money, and cash flow is kind of where he got into it. So that's why this is a perfect quick discussion. Now that my boys are kind of teenagers, they're starting to want more expensive items, things that you just can't go buy, right? You just can't go and walk down and sweep some floors and do some household chores like what I used to have them do and mow, and then go off and buy some candy, right? Now they're wanting to buy like real things, like Xboxes or PlayStations, or my oldest is wanting car parts and gas now, right, that he's driving. And so it's trying to now take that foundation that we instilled in them, a lot of what you said, and start to now say, now, how do you make the money last, right? That's the conversation I'm having with them. It's just not about getting and spending, but now there's the purpose of why you save money. Maybe you didn't we recently had a pretty big snowstorm. My oldest has a way to make a little bit extra money here and there. His problem is that all the ways he made money got canceled because all of his friends couldn't come over and use his service, right? And so he was like, man, I was supposed to have like 7 things this weekend. I was going to make $150. He goes, but nobody could come by because of the weather. And he goes, now, I'm like, well, but you still want to do some of the things you want to do to maintain your life, right? He's like, yeah. I'm like, that's why you save the money and not just spend it. So we were able to really kind of teach them around those, but we're having them think long term. And Jason, my best story, because I know this is a quick segment to turn into what I think is important of adulthood discussions. But my youngest, when every time he wants to buy a new thing for his online gaming, he's like, okay, it's $8.99, Dad. I'm like, no, it's not. It's $8.99 plus taxes. Well, so he learned the tax game, which I categorize into your story. That's also the give bucket. Yes, there's a charitable giving and a tithing, but you also have to give to the government, right? And the more money you make. But so he understood that. And then and this goes back to one of our first episodes of the year that we recorded. He goes, man, Dad, this stuff's getting expensive. He goes, inflation is just not doing well. He goes, last year for the same thing, it was $7.50. And now it's $10. He goes, this inflation's out of control. And I'm like, well, what's that mean, right? And so we engage a lot in conversation. So I guess my message of this is that if you have young adults in the household, this is about thinking about more of the long term, how to save, how to have that that resistance or that control, that restraint of just spending money, right? Understand what the importance of making money is, but really start to drive them in the direction around having those longer term goals. Like they got to start planning for college. They want to start buying new things for their cars, their bigger expenses. So my audience question for everybody, because I think that's kind of the focus of today, is that what are you doing, and are you supporting and taking that intentional, direction within your young adults in the family to help them make financial decisions that are a little bit more long term and transitioning from just the basics of saving, spending, and giving. Now it's putting some more meat behind the potatoes. So, what do you got to add? Anything there, Jason?
The only thing to add is start bringing them into, okay, if you start to invest this money, what does that look like over a long period of time? Right. And you could work with your financial advisor by just going, okay, if we invest this much up front and we save this much money for the next, let's say 10 years, each year for the next 10 years, what does that look like when little Johnny's 40 years old? Right. You could, now if you're doing this on your own, you could go, okay, let's start putting money into like a custodial account, and I'm going to have you help me pick the stocks that we're going to buy for you. Right. And what are some of the companies you like? You mentioned PlayStation. You mentioned, do you like Nike? Right. I know you like those shoes. Let's evaluate those companies. Let's see how I show you my evaluation approach. I'm assuming the listeners have an evaluation approach. Okay. And if you don't, that's another podcast for another time. But bringing your child into that conversation and then going, okay, let's look at this in a month. Let's look at this in a quarter from now or 6 months from now, so they could see what happened. They could get an idea of like, okay, well, it's down, but it's only down on paper. Let's continue holding it, right? Let's do our evaluation, seeing if we still like it or not. Maybe it changed. There was this book that I'm reading, and Andy, and then we're going to get to the next topic. It was going to take a rocket from Earth to go to the moon. It was only on course 3% of the time. 97% of the time, it was off course. It needed to make small tweaks and adjustments over the course to get to be able to land on the moon. And so when you're looking at the investments with the children and you're showing them, okay, it's not doing what we wanted it to do, it's going in the other direction. Okay, do we need to make a course correction and an adjustment, or do we stay the course? What do we have to do? What's the adjustment? That will teach them that finances is an ongoing responsibility, not just, you put the money in and you cross your fingers and hope and pray. The market doesn't work nice like that, unfortunately. And then let's get into the preparing adults, children. I'm talking now your children are adults. I mean, I have clients that are in their 80s, right? And we're having conversations with their children that are in their 50s and 60s. But in my client's mind, those children are still their baby girl and baby boy, right? It's just what it is. But what is those conversations like now? And this is why it's such an important thing. By adulthood, financial habits have really been established. But this phase is when understanding wealth transfer and legacy planning becomes really essential. Adults need to learn how to manage, grow, and pass on their wealth responsibly to really align within the family's values. Andy, what are some of the things that you want our listeners to pull away from this section?
Yeah, no, because I know this is probably the biggest section that we're going to cover in the quickest summary. So, hopefully by this point, if you've followed along, you've really helped develop, a good foundation. You've taught good money habits along the way. But this is an opportunity to kind of really sit down and have those real intentional discussions. Like let's just open the book. You don't have to get in the numbers. I tell clients all the time, but it's important for people to understand what that overall financial vision is. That mission. We have one in our household. We have kind of the understanding. We express it when our children are planning to get married. We talk about it with clients all the time. If you have children that are now married, your financial plan needs to change, and they need to understand the why. Because what you don't want to do is let money disrupt the love you have with your children. And a lot of relationships do get messed up, family relationships, because money gets in the way. So it's important to have those conversations. Here's the reality for those listeners that are on the on the adult side that are going to be one day transitioning to money, they have a pretty good idea of the amount of money you have. They've grown up, right? They know that if you are struggling, they know that if you have some wealth that's going to be established over. So it's really just important to kind of sit down, have the overall discussion around what the overall vision is, how you do think about transitioning money, what's important to you. So I think it's really important to sit down and have a conversation more than anything in this point in time. It's less teaching and more conversation.
It's conversation. And I think this is a really good question I'm going to pass on to our listeners. What legacy do you want your family's wealth to represent? And how can you start preparing your children now to honor that in the future? That's profound. And something I'm going to have to start thinking about and how I prepare myself for when that conversation comes within our family. Well, that was Andy the Man Merchant. I am Jason Noble. You just watched another episode of 20 Minutes of Clarity. Thank you so much for tuning in. We ask that you like, subscribe, and follow, or share it with somebody that you feel needs to hear this message today. Thank you so much. I'm really excited for the next topic as we continue the series of love and finances. Thank you so much.